Good afternoon. Call the meeting to order. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from our previous meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are going to do things a little bit different today, just for the public understands. We're doing a consent agenda to try to move the meeting along, and Joe also asked to educate us a little bit today, so that's what we'll do. Is there a consent agenda, order of the agenda? I say, is there a motion to approve the order of agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda, approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call vote, please.
Dr. Mahoney,
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg.
Aye.
Mr. Judd,
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson.
Aye.
Ms. Carlson. Yes. Mrs. Sherling. Yes. Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Campbell.
Yes.
Mr. Dardis.
Yes.
Mr. Olson.
Yes.
Joel, did you have anything to say about the consent agenda, or it says you had briefing here on it, or just?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. So in an effort to make the meetings more efficient and allow us more time to really dive into some topics I'd like to discuss with the board, I proposed the idea of the consent agenda. And so just for the board's knowledge and preparation for future meetings, obviously if there's anything on the consent agenda that anybody would like to pull off and discuss, the board will, just somebody needs to make a motion to do that, and we'll take it off and we'll discuss it. Generally, the consent agenda items I'm going to have is typical contracting actions that do go through the committees and are recommended for approval for the full board. But like I said, if there's anything additional that we would like to discuss, or if anybody has any questions, feel free to pull that off. You do get the packet a week beforehand or the weekend before the meeting. So if there's any questions on any of those items, I'm always available to take a call and discuss those as well. So I know it's a new concept, but hopefully it'll allow us to be more efficient in our meetings and allow more time for more candid discussion on other topics.
So then we'll move right into your report.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll start just with a financial overview from January. As you can see in your packet and up on the screen here, on the far right-hand column is the cost to date. So we expended $2.4 million in January on the specific items you can see there. So not a lot of expenditure activities in January taking place. We continue to move forward with in-town projects, the I-29 road race project in land acquisition, and then a pretty significant effort on the P3, getting the RFP draft 4 out for the developers. And you can see here, I'll report to the board, actual expenditures total for project to date is $528 million, up that $2.47 million from last month. A number of strategic initiatives I want to report out to the board. I think we have some things to celebrate here. The first thing is the Corps of Engineers did announce in their work plan that the Diversion Authority will be receiving the full funding request of the $100 million for forecast year 2020. This is significant because this amount is what the Corps was requesting. This will keep the federal portion of the project on schedule. And so I'll just break down that $100 million will be used for $50 million to complete the wild rice control structure, $32 million to construct and deliver the Southern Embankment Reach 1, $8 million to complete the inlet control structure, and $10 million for environmental and cultural mitigation. Now, the question I'm sure the board maybe has is how did they bid out these projects if they didn't have the full amount? Now, one thing to consider here is the local contribution to the federal project is a little over $50 million. That was given to the Corps already. So they're able to use that money to kind of roll into the next project. So this backfills that local contribution. And for the forecast year 2021, we're already $50 million into that from that local contribution. So if there's any questions on that, I can take that now. But I think this is a pretty big reason to celebrate, the largest appropriation to the federal components to date. And I think it shows the federal commitment to the project is certainly here. So, all right, seeing no questions, I'll move on. Consultant contracting savings. I've been working with the consultants on the DA project for the last few months in order to dive into their MSAs and propose some different contracting changes with the intent of saving the DA money. The most significant one before you today, and it was on the consent agenda, was pulling AE2S out from the Jacobs contract. And so AE2S will continue to provide land acquisition services and manage the land acquisition program, just like they always have. We did not add or remove scope from their work items, but we are taking the task order out from the PMC contract and contracting directly with AE2S. So as you can see on the consent agenda, that task order was for $16 million. That was previously approved by the board as a Jacobs task order. It is now an AE2S task order that will be managed by the Diversion Authority directly. Now the savings comes into play here because of the contractor subconsultant markup that would be contained if they stayed under the Jacobs contract. And that savings is anticipated to be approximately $2 million for the board, for the DA. That will be realized next month when we pull that scope out from Jacobs contract, and we'll have a task order amendment for Jacobs that will remove that 16 million plus that 2 million in savings, and that will be realized next month. So that's pretty significant to the program. Continuing to work through some changes with HMG as well. We should hopefully have that master service agreement in front of the board at the March meeting. I'll give a little status report on the staffing update and the organizational structure for the administration of the Diversion Authority. We have interviews next week planned for 5 applicants for the executive assistant position. I would expect that to be filled in March. We've also posted the communications director position today. We'll be moving forward with identifying candidates for interview for that position. And I'm hoping to have the diversion engineering director position posted early next week as well. So a lot of activity there. Pleased to say we got some great candidates for the executive assistant position, so I'm pretty excited to bring somebody on board to assist me in day-to-day operations. So, a couple other notable things here. We did have the release of the P3 RFP to the 3 developers. That was released on February 19th. Pretty significant step. We don't anticipate any substantial changes to the RFP at this point. We will be having one-on-ones with the development teams the first week of April. And we'll just be working back and forth through that RFP towards the next basically final draft release. And we'll be able to report out the progress to the board at the April meeting. A couple other things. We've been working very intently with the Office of the State Engineer this last month on the construction permit for the channel itself. We're making progress there. We're also working with them on getting the final approved mitigation plan. And that, as you will note, is a requirement to access legislative funding. So we hope to have that completed and approved by the Office of the State Engineer, hopefully by the end of March. So, Mr. Chair, that concludes my update, and I'll take any questions if anybody has any.
You had value propositions on here as well, is that?
Yeah, we'll just skip past that.
Okay.
I had a couple things, but we'll save those for the next meeting. So.
Oh, very good, trying to keep us moving now.
Mr. Chairman, just a comment. When we walked through Joel's presentation yesterday at the Finance Committee, recognition of his joining the team and leading us through this process to, the words I think I used were right-size our agreements. Modernize maybe is a better term. And, you know, the news that we just heard of $2 million reduction in fees is significant. You you know, John Shockley's been involved as well with helping Joel through that process, and Martin. But I think it's important to recognize that we're starting to reduce some of the obligations based on the life of the project. And in the case of the North Dakota legislature, next session, we'll have a number that we can say that we've cut out of the cost of the program, which will be warm news for some that have been watchful eye of the amount of money we're spending on engineering and design. So we're, you know, it's a balanced approach, it's a fair approach, and I just think it's proper to congratulate Joel on his determination, because it's taken a number of months to get here. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Grimberg.
And I'd just like to thank Mary Charlene for her work on the $100 million. That's going to be hard to outdo this year, but the fact that you took a team out to Washington and did that, well, thank you very much. So.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks to the entire team that went out there and worked so hard to procure this funding. It's pretty exciting to see this through, and I'm sure that that there will be more this year that you'll be procuring as well. So I'm looking forward to hearing that.
Minnesota, that's where I'm going to get it.
All right, Mr. Chair, if I can, I would like to move forward with a small educational session for the board, and just kind of give a brief overview of kind of what I would hope to get out of this. The P3 arrangement is a new arrangement for our area. This is the first P3 project that's ever been proposed in the state of North Dakota. It's a very large project. We were dealing with a mega project here, and I feel it prudent to ensure that I'm providing enough information so that the board can make good decisions as we move into this next year with the anticipated close of the P3 deal at the end of the year here. So I've chosen a number of topics to discuss at the various board meetings throughout the year. And the first one that we would like to discuss with you today is on risk transfer. And so I will bring John Shockley up to assist in this discussion, and we'll open it up for some questions after John and I present the information.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the Diversion Authority Board. Thank you for allowing us to provide some education sessions regarding the P3 process. It is relatively novel. As Joel had indicated to this area, this is the first large-scale P3 project that we've had in North Dakota. And so what I'll be discussing today is risk transfer. What is risk transfer? Well, really at the end of the day, what risk transfer is managing a risk in a contract, and that can be at the most basic level. All contracts have risk management. So you think about an insurance contract you have with your insurer for your home. You are transferring the risk of loss of your home to the insurer. So if your house burns down, the insurer is going to pay a set amount of money pursuant to that agreement. All contracts have some type of risk sharing within the contract. And at the heart of every P3 contract is a significant discussion about how risk is shared between the owner, here the Diversion Authority, and the contractor, or in this case, the developer. And for just background information, the developer in our case is a consortium that will have a finance component. They will have a design component, they'll have a construction component, and they'll have an operations component. So it's really a special purpose entity that has all of these parts that come together to bid on our project. And I think what the easiest way to really look at different types of contracts is to compare the traditional design bid build contracts, which we're all used to with respect to your different member entities. And design bid build, what that means is the owner, whether it's the county, the watershed district, or one of the cities, employs an engineer to design the project. So the owner actually retains the engineer who prepares the plans and specs, puts together the overall design, the schedules for the project, and then puts it out on the market, and people bid against that. You select the lowest responsible bidder, and then it gets built. So in a traditional sense, the owner retains all of the risk of design because you have to hire the engineer. You retain all the risk of financing it. You have to go out, you have to obtain the financing, whether that's temporary or long-term financing. The public entity owns the operations risks, which means you have to operate the highway or the bridge or the pipe for the next 30 or 50 years. Same with the maintenance and same with the performance. Public sector owns all of those costs. You don't know what those costs are going to be once you put the bid out, you get the bid and you accept it. You don't really know for sure how much it's going to cost to maintain that asset over a period of 30 or 50 years. You might have an estimate, you may not, but it's sort of hidden as part of the bid. Whereas in the P3 world, the owner takes on the risk of putting together performance specs. And next month, you're going to hear about what is a performance spec. A performance spec, and just generally from my legal standpoint, the engineers will get into a lot more detail about what a technical spec is. A performance spec is really setting the parameters or the sideboards of what we want the team to design. I like to use the highway as a great illustration. With a traditional project, you'll be putting together a set of plans and specs that will say 3 lanes, the concrete is X number of feet deep, the lanes are this wide, the turning radiuses are this wide, the spacing for the lanes is X number of feet, and it's very, very prescriptive and very detailed. Whereas in the P3 world, it might be as simple as we would like you to design a 6-lane highway that carries traffic at 55 miles an hour. It doesn't exceed this level of noise. We want to see a certain level of congestion, etc. And the P3 developer then owns all of the risks of designing and building it, of financing it, operating it, maintaining, and performing. So when you open up the bid, and later on this year, we'll be talking about opening up the bids, it doesn't end up being a traditional bid in the sense that you get one set of costs for your project, your capital cost. You'll actually get a capital cost and then what it costs to operate and maintain it over a period of 30 years. In our case, this will be the diversion channel and the bridges that cross it. So from a transparency perspective, I like the P3 process because instead of just getting the base bid on a building or a piece of infrastructure, now the public sector knows exactly how much it costs to operate and maintain that. So as part of transferring that risk, it's really important that everybody does their due diligence at the beginning so that those risks can be appropriately priced by the private market and the public side. So why is this so important to understand? You as the owner need to know what risks you're retaining and what risks that you're transferring to the developer. And we have a whole team, both technical, legal, and finance, that we're trying to find that right mix of which risks to retain, which are best held by the authority, and which are best to leave to the private sector. And why do you need to know this? Well, for the purposes of the P3 contract, it's not the same as the traditional contract that we talked about. This is a long-term contract that you're entering into, so we want to make sure that we have the right mix and that we're balancing the risks that we're transferring to the private sector, so we're not overpaying for the private sector to take on too much risk, and we're not retaining too much of the risk. And so a good example, maybe showing at a very high level what that risk transfer means in a typical P3 contract. So in a P3 contract, our technical specs say developer is required to maintain the bridge for 30 years with no corrosion on the beams. The example in this picture is after 20 years, it has rust on there. And under a P3 contract, the developer is required to go in, maintain it, repaint it, maybe rebuild sections of the bridge if necessary, to maintain it in a condition acceptable under the P3 specs. In the public sector, in a traditional contract, the authority would be responsible for doing that. So you'd actually have to figure out how you're going to pay for this expenditure. Perhaps you have to go bond for it. All of these costs are built into the P3's developer's bid with respect to the long-term operations and maintenance of the project. So for a period of 30 years, they will take care of the project, they will operate it, they will maintain it. And so that's the nice part about it, is you don't have to worry from a budgeting standpoint of now we have to fix the bridge. It's already built right into the bid. And so in this case, the developer was responsible for fixing the bridge to last another 10 years. Within most P3 agreements, they also include certain what are referred to as handback requirements. And what a handback requirement is, it sets certain specified conditions of the asset. Here, a bridge, it has to meet certain quality requirements before you hand it back to the public sector. And so there's a lot of protections that are built in for the public sector and offering a good exchange of risk and value for money for the public sector. So why else is it important? It is also important from a contract management perspective during the P3 process. These are all three of our teams are very sophisticated. They're large construction firms, and it's important to understand this is not a traditional project where you have the owner's construction manager out on site every day saying yay or nay to certain portions of the project being constructed or soil being compacted in a certain way. Your P3 contract, we have a spec that says you can't have a grade steeper than 4:1. The slope was constructed at a greater angle, and the owner said, well, just let it slide. We're fine with that. We're not going to enforce the P3 contract. Well, guess what? It fails early. Guess whose responsibility it is? Because you have taken that risk back. So all of the effort we went in transferring the risk onto the private party, we just accepted it back. And so that's why in all of the P3 contract documents, it's very prescriptive as to the administrative process on the P3 side. That's why it's so important to have a good team that's implementing and executing the actual P3 after we sign the deal. So what other types of risk transfer do we see in a typical P3 setting? So we tried to summarize all of the different areas of risk at a very high level that we're trying to transfer away in a P3 agreement. So in a typical P3, as in ours, we are holding on to the regulatory and legislative responsibility. So the diversion authority is holding on to the responsibility to comply with permits and regulatory compliance. All of our regulatory offices, such as the Office of State Engineer, Army Corps of Engineers, all of those different agencies want to make sure that the project operates within the scope of the permitting requirements. We want to make sure it operates within the scope of the permitting requirements. And so we're retaining the risk of making sure the project operates within the permitting requirements, but that's one of the criteria in their contract is they will be in default if the developer is not operating the project within that scope. We're also retaining, if there's a government default, which we hope that never happens, that's just natural that we have to retain that risk as the government entity. What are the risks that we're transferring over to the public sector or private sector here? Planning and design of the project. So as we talked about earlier on, in a typical design bid build project, the owner would retain that, we would be designing it, we would be planning it. Here we're transferring it over to the P3 developer. So as part of the process, as part of their bid, they'll come up with an indicative design that we'll look at. We'll award them the lowest responsible bid as part of the P3, and then they will go out and finish the design of the project. They are also responsible for obtaining permits and approvals. What kind of permits and approvals? Well, the types of permits that as you build or design a portion of the project, you might need to get a building permit, you might need to get approval from the Office of State Engineer for the actual construction, a whole host of different types of permits, stormwater permits, that is all placed on the private sector because they're the ones out in the field, they're the ones that are designing and constructing and actually putting the infrastructure in the ground. Construction, same as with the design bid build process, they're retaining the risk of construction of the project. They're also retaining the responsibility for generating the workforce to build the project. More importantly, they are retaining the financial risk for the project. So as part of their bid, they are putting a bid together in which they will retain 40 to 50% of the total project cost over time, over 30 years. And so they have to bring their own private financing to the table. In our transaction, that's about $400 to $450 million of financing that they bring to the table, and that gets repaid over 30 years after the project is completed. So instead of the public sector going out and bonding for that $450 million, that's retained by the private sector. During construction, we'll be making some milestone payments so that we give them some funding to drive the cost down. That's that risk sharing to make sure that we're getting the best price on the contract. The other nice part about them sharing the financial risk in the project is they don't get that payment until they reach substantial completion. So in many of your contracts, I hear often, well, the contractor's not done on time. The contractor's not done on time. Why aren't they done on time? Why isn't the street open? Well, in a P3, if they don't reach substantial completion, they don't get their availability payment. And so it's a natural incentive that's built into the agreement to enforce that timing. And so they can wait longer to complete it, but they're not going to get their availability payment. They're not going to be able to pay their lenders, and they do not want to be in that situation. And we've seen around the country where some projects, some developers have been late, and they haven't been able to get their AP payments. And so it's quite an ability for the owner to motivate compliance with the timeline under the contract. And then finally, the private sector takes on the private sector default. That's typical in a transaction. What types of risks are shared by both parties? That means we split the risk. Those are political risks. Let's say that there's a change of law. The legislature decides to change the law. We come up with sharing mechanisms to share that risk. Same with acts of God. In this project, flooding and what that means has been a big discussion item of how do you fit the right balance between a flood that occurs during construction that stops them from finishing the project on time or adds cost. So we've had a tremendous amount of discussion on how to share that risk. And we did put in the final item, which is demand, which isn't really part of this project, but in a lot of P3 projects where you have toll roads, that risk of demand for the project is placed on the private sector. Tried to run through it very quickly because I know we're trying to be more timely in our meetings. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have. I tried to give a very high-level overview of the risk transfer. Next month, I believe Kim Daly from Jacobs will be talking about the technical specifications or performance specs, so you can kind of better understand how those work.
Little concerned that you have acts of God and politicians together, John, but the rest of it was fine. So Joel, are you going to report for Terry Williams today?
I will, Mr. Chair. So Terry unfortunately couldn't be here today. I did have an opportunity to catch up with her this week. I did cover the $100 million addition to the project through the core work plan. So that's right now they're working through divvying that up and keeping their project teams on track. So I know Commissioner Grimberg usually asks Terry if core's on time and on budget. I did verify with them, they are on time and on budget. We did actually do a deep dive into their cost estimates and where they're at. And there's a number of positive things, I think, coming in the next few months that we can share with the board as far as where these projects are coming in at bid-wise and also some cost savings on design. I'll be happy to report the physical model that is in Vicksburg that hopefully some board members can come down and take a look at in the future, is providing cost savings to the design of the Red River control structure. So a pretty significant decrease in the size of the scour hole, which may not mean much to you right now, but it would indicate millions of dollars worth of savings that are coming out of that model. So all good things I heard when I was in St. Paul this week meeting with the Corps. And Terry can certainly update you in the near future on some of those things. So
So
all
just
in
for the
all,
board, you went down and met in St. Paul with the core members. It was a great opportunity for you to work on some things that you wanted to communicate from the board as well. And what I've heard, you're just trying to set up different types of things that you'd like to share as a group sometimes with them. And what I've heard from reports, it went very well. Is that right?
That's correct. It went very well. So I wanted to set up communication protocols with the Corps to make sure we're on the same page and working hand in hand. We're certainly have been doing that. I think we can effectively do that better in the future. I had an opportunity to meet most of the team members that are working on this project at the Corps. And they sat me down and kind of showed me where they're at with their design of the Red River control structure, where we're at with the design of the Southern Embankment Reach 1. And all of those are currently on schedule and on budget. So.
I guess, John, you're back up to talk about WIFIA update? John Shockley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a very brief WIFIA update today. We are gearing up to submit our formal application on April 1st. At the next board meeting, we intend to bring forward the completed WIFIA application. We've been having calls with WIFIA about every 2 weeks regarding all of the documentation that's required to submit for the WIFIA program. They've been very easy to work with. It's actually been, they're really interested in the project. I did provide some documentation I handed out today. They really appreciated the preparation of those materials, the white paper. And so I can answer any questions you might have, but it's proceeding along well. As part of the WIFIA process, there is what is referred to as an indicative rating. That is through the WIFIA loan itself and comes from Moody's. You will likely be seeing an expenditure for that cost come through either in April or May, depending upon when they invoice us. But I just didn't want there to be any shock. It's about $125,000 to $140,000 for a rating on such a large loan.
And could we have Jonathan Judd read this and bring us a report next time just to tell us the interpretation?
So moved.
Second. I'm very happy to be sitting next to a practical joker here, for the record.
Thank you, John. Any questions to John? Public outreach, Roger Olson, welcome back. You've been busy harvesting or what? What has kept you away from us?
Oh, I met a surgeon here 5 weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. One of your counterparts, probably. But anyway, we did not have our monthly outreach meeting yesterday. But at this time, I'd like to turn the report over to Tom Dawson from the Business Leaders Task Force. Tom?
Welcome back, Tom.
Hey, thanks, Roger. I didn't know that I was gone, but I do feel like I haven't been here for representing the task force. So we had a chamber board meeting this morning. It made me think about how much we all miss Craig Whitney, but also it made me think about how Craig was really the driving force behind putting the business task force together. And so I just thought it was appropriate to mention that today and to talk about what we would like to accomplish. You know, it's been, we've had some great weather lately, but we've also been reading in the paper about the flood predictions. And so it reminds all of us, and it reminds particularly businesses, just how important it is to keep the gas pedal down on what our business task force was asked to do. We've been very happy to be involved in the efforts to provide permanent flood protection, and we've really appreciated working closely with this group. We appreciate being asked to sit at the table here. We appreciate people here being at our task force meetings and hearing from people like Rocky and others. And so we haven't had a meeting in a while, so I'd like to suggest that the 1st of April, we put together a meeting where we can bring Joel, and I don't think Joel has met with our group, and other members from this board, and just talk about specifically what we can do and what needs to be done to keep this project moving and to just to figure out some of the specifics that our group can be involved in. So we'll just, as a chamber, we'll take it upon ourselves to come up with a date and get our group together. And I know they're anxious to stay involved and just do whatever we need to do to keep moving forward, to keep dirt, being turned and to prevent any additional delays. So I just, again, want to thank you for letting us be part of this group. And
Tom, we're really excited because we've heard rumors that your group wants to get their hands dirty, and we're going to have a sandbagging event just for you.
you had mentioned that to me, so that's another thing we'll do is get notices out to all of our members, 2,100 members, and let them know the specifics about when you need the most help in sandbagging, and we'll make sure there's local businesses involved in that.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Mary Sherling, do you have a land management report?
Thank you. We had no policy recommendations to address this month, so we did not meet either. So, but that being said, land acquisition is full speed ahead, and I've got Mr. Eric Dodds here, and he will go over that briefly, where we're at.
So you didn't meet, but you still have a report, Eric? What's going on here?
It'll be brief, I promise. Good afternoon, board members. Just real briefly, a few things on the land committee. So as Commissioner Shirley mentioned, we didn't necessarily have any policy items for the board or for the committee this month, but yet there's of course a tremendous amount of lands activities going on, and Roger and his group can attest to that, as well as the members of the MCC-JPA board. A few points up here on the slide. So we continue to make progress. It seems like each month we're reporting that we've got 5 to 10 parcels that continue to be acquired, and so this month, the second bullet point there, five parcels acquired since the last meeting. Those negotiations on the remaining parcels on the channel are continuing. We are following all the steps in the process and sending out formal negotiation letters and moving down the process there. As we buy more and more property, we have more and more farmland that we are entering into lease agreements for, and so we're securing those lease agreements for the 2020 crop season as time moves on. In addition to buying land, we're also working to secure the rights of entries, where the Corps of Engineers wants to continue doing some design survey work, soil borings, and that type of information, both on the North Dakota and the Minnesota side of the embankment. And then one of the big efforts that's been happening over the last several months is trying to secure easements to allow the Corps to continue its monitoring for biotic and geomorphic studies, and so that's the biogeo monitoring. There are approximately 400 parcels that we've been trying to get access or easements on over the last several months. Many of those parcels are owned by various government entities, and so over the last month or so, we've been reaching out to Fargo Park District and the City of Moorhead and Clay County and the like, and so we're making some progress in that regard. And then the last thing maybe I'd mention here on this slide is there continues to be quite a bit of effort being spent on refining our mitigation of ag impacts, and that stems from not only the valuation of flowage easements, but also having NDSU Agribusiness Department update their ag risk study, and I'm hoping that they're prepared to give a presentation at the March meeting. We've been working with a group called Watson Associates to help put some more details together about the crop insurance type mitigation programs. And then the last bullet point on the slide here is related to farmsteads. There's been some activity recently trying to really hone in on our policy development for how we relocate farmsteads. And then just turn your attention here, this is just a snapshot of our monthly status report. Again, showing you sort of graphically where we're making progress. The greens, again, mean that we've acquired those properties. The blues mean we're in negotiation. And so you can see that we continue to make a lot of lands acquired up on the north end of the channel, and we're getting more and more parcels turning from blue to green on the southern end. Obviously, we've got some more work to be done there. But happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions, the board? Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Mary. Finance, Tony Grinberg.
Mr. Chairman, the first item, 11A in your report, largely was covered by Mr. Paulson in his executive director report. You know, expenditures is just under 2.2 million for the year, cumulative 528,500,000. This year's fiscal budget, about 2% has been expended, and our net cash position continues to increase in incremental amounts at just under 94.5 million. Be happy to answer any questions, but I'd move approval of the finance report.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions or discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg?
Aye.
Mr. Judd?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Ms. Carlson?
Yes.
Mrs. Schirling?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Dardis?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
Very good.
Mr. Chairman, 11B then, move approval of the expenditures for the month, tabbed 11B in your packet for $1.877 million, largest to the Cass County Joint Resources Water District, Dorsey, Whitney, Onset, Twitchell, Cass County, and the FM Saratoga Club.
So you move that?
I move that.
Is there a second?
Second.
Chad, got it. Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg?
Aye.
Mr. Judd?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Ms. Carlson?
Yes.
Mrs. Schirling?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Dardis?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I will start off with 11C, the Ide Bailey engagement agreement. I believe Joel will fill in on some of the other updates as far as the contracting actions that require approval. But pursuant to last month's meeting and direction to engage an audit firm for 3 years of audits for the, largely driven by the WIFIA loan agreement. You can see that number came in at 70,000. And so I'd move approval of Ide Bailey for the purpose of.
Tony, could you take them all, please, all items?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, did we not approve these on the consent agenda?
That's correct, we did. But we can still discuss them if you guys would like, since this is
We can,
new.
let's let them discuss it, but we don't
Introduction,
need to
yeah.
vote again.
Yep,
okay.
that's fine. That's fine.
Nice. I don't have anything else to say.
I thought just that you did such a good work on your finance committee. I thought it's fantastic. You saved us $2 million.
We're saving money again. The audit came in under what we had budgeted for too, so.
Other business.
We'll just have to work out that wrinkle so that we don't have this listed if it's already on the consent.
Yes, we will work on that. It's a work in progress, Tony.
All right.
So after we adjourn today, we're going to have a declaration, emergency declaration by Mayor Dardis, myself, and Chad Peterson as the county, and a joint effort to have all of us working together in flood protection and doing the things we have to do this spring. So after we adjourn that, probably we'll set up in 5 to 10 minutes if any of you want to stay around for that. It is rumored that Bernie Dardis is going to speak, so it could be quite enthralling. Any other business? Is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.